A sort of impromptu council had gathered at the centralmost grange to all the outlying coastal towns, and a decision was reached. In order to keep pressure off the farms, a quick reaction team needed to be ready behind the scouts and intel folks. These bad groups had started getting whittled down somehow, or in a few weeks. These bad groups had to start getting whittled down somehow. Or in a few weeks, when the subdivisions were dry, the farms would be the next target. Drone Girl and Nines were at the meeting and were asked to volunteer for recon. Nines could protect Drone Girl, and Drone Girl could pilot the drones from her truck as a base station far back, where they would be safe. In addition to the ground-based recon and intel unit, who isn't meant to engage but to observe and report back, Drone Girl would get up-to-date info, Nines would call it in, and quick response team would hit them hard. After that, they'd retreat back to the safety of the fortified coast area and pick the next target. What the group offered in return is that Drone Girl's truck would get outfitted with a new appropriate paint job for the task, which would be a sort of urban camo. A local paint shop in one of the other towns said they'd donate the labor and materials. The paint job would help break the lines from the truck so it could blend in virtually anywhere. Another shop would outfit the truck with monitors and batteries to turn it into a fully mobile drone operating station. Nines remembered that she had state-of-the-art cameras, and the shop said they would include those as well. Then lastly, the radio equipment guys were going to put a whole additional set of radio antenna on the vehicle so Drone Girl could control the drones from several miles out. Unfortunately, the alternative option was for Nines' mentor to go out on patrols, and she didn't want to sacrifice him when she could go in his place. She figured maybe it was also time for the younger crowd to start facing the threat wherever it tactically made sense to, and Drone Girl agreed after her altercations as well. It was time to start lowering the numbers if the good guys further out had lost their footing from the influx of violent crime coming out of the cities. Nine's mentor and a portion of his team were sort of a last line of defense for important infrastructure, like the library, ammunition assembly, and the gun store. Also, Nines had grown fond of Drone Girl, so the two had become inseparable, so if one went, both were going to go. It was settled. 14, patrol time, on the road, week 4-ish. Recon had been working the set of subdivisions to the southeast and northeast for the last week. Northeast was completely gone and had 2 layers of choke points that were guarded. The major highway had 2 intersections, one closer to the big city and one closer to the coastal access. They were separated by about 60 miles of highway. The intersection closer to the coast was heavily locked down by a coalition of groups interested in making sure everywhere west didn't turn into a total hellhole. The intersection closer to the city was trying to make sure nobody came in that didn't belong. They'd essentially turned it into their own functioning city-state. Everyone else was mashed into the middle. There was at least a semblance of a buffer on the northeast side. The southeast side there was none. Directly east was a giant forest. People were trying to live there and catch game there and everything in between all at once. Therefore, it sort of became a no man's land for anyone with common sense, because every individual and group without a clue was trying to operate in it at the same time. The resources in it would be emptied out by winter's end, and they'd all come looking for resources elsewhere as well. The forest was a priority to secure around, but it wasn't as urgent yet as the Southeast Highway. The Southeast Highway ran through many small towns, all which were struggling and too small to form much of a security. Many of the people in unprotected lots had migrated west early on in the collapse before all the roadblocks and highway banditry. The rest stayed and tried to hold out, which didn't work, or they moved further south, which was fine. The majority of people in subdivisions were useless, though, trying to live normal lives, and went into shutdown mode. These are where the roving gangs kept collecting at, draining the resources, and doing horrible things. The scouts would identify a subdivision. Drone Girl from her mobile control center would scope it all out. Then they would relay the information to the response team. They were all the same. 2 entrances, exits, fenced in with some, generally speaking, worthless fencing. No gate to speak of, no watchtowers of any sort. horrible things going on inside. The first one, it wasn't much of a big deal to flush them out and create a 3-stage ambush. 200 people cut down in a matter of about 15 minutes. Instead of any sort of thanks, the people in the subdivision had mostly all sympathized and empathized with their captors, and now believed the ensuing wrath would be significantly worse. Someone in the team tried to explain that this was only the beginning, and there was no way to negotiate with them. The bad guys would eventually be done with them, and that'd be it. The people in the subdivision wouldn't have it, though, and only 2 families opted to leave with the strike team. They all went back. Some vetting took place of the new folks, and many discussions took place the coming days. Everyone admitted they'd probably got lucky that time. They also realized they expended a lot of ammunition, even though it was very efficiently spent. A note was sent to the alchemy girl, who Nines finally remembered her name was Malaise. They wanted less lethal means in case people wanted to surrender, but also they could disperse the bad guys easier. Basically, they wanted options. Malaise was okay with developing less lethals, so that was settled. What she developed was her special blend that caused the face to swell shut, burn at the same time, and it was sticky and very colorful. For identification. Some various tier grenades with the mixture were made, and trades were back and forth a few times until a bunch of surplus gas masks were acquired from a military surplus store a few towns over. Everyone was happy with legit gas masks because they'd been using 2-liter bottles with duct tape tubes going into socks with charcoal. They worked, but it was nice to have the real thing. After making sure they were all good fits with good filters, it was all taken care of. The painters also had some spare filters that went over only the mouth. That was good for people with glasses. For eye protection, they used either chem goggles or paint goggles and anti-fog to make sure they could still see when needed. The masks the painters used were unique in the way not only were they stylish and comfortable, but were very affordable pre-collapse, and the filters were significantly cheaper than milsurp masks from around the world. They were more modern, but unfortunately the supply never caught up with demand. Thankfully, the paint shop had many to spare, so Nines and Drone Girl were able to have only the bottom masks in the van as a last resort with some chemical goggles. Maybe with some luck the next group could be disarmed without gunning them all down, who knows. At least the option would be there. Either way, Recon was back and had scouted out another subdivision full of another 200 bullies that had staged up to clean the area dry. Everyone geared up, and off they went again. The subdivision was a little further out, and it had no defenses, exactly like the others. It seemed as if they were using the subdivision as a home base to stage up and attack the other subdivisions that maybe had a little bit more defense. They could run the base out of ammo from here, and then eventually overcome them with sheer numbers. If they failed, there was always another raiding party from nearby that would sooner or later get them. All of the subdivisions were, after all, completely isolated, with no way out in any direction that they knew of. Not that many of them would leave anyway, but at least as far as trading and supply lines were concerned, it wasn't going to happen. Drone Girl did her thing, scouted it all out. The people running this one had done a little homework and weren't spooked or lured by anything. There was high ground nearby, but no clear shots, as all the bad guys were in houses with their involuntary surrogates. The team waited until night with no clear avenue that would incur unfavorable casualties. They listened on the radio, and no radio chatter was coming in or out. They didn't scout either. They only occasionally have someone run from one house to another. Drone Girl didn't think they'd been spotted, so they stayed put until nightfall. As soon as dusk hit, the strike team started setting up traps between the cars and bushes, where they kept seeing the bad guys run back and forth. They also figured out which house was the obvious headquarters. More thought was put into the plan. It was decided to have one of Drone Girl's drones drop one of Malaise's grenades directly down into the chimney port. This would cause them to run into the rest of the traps, and feel very unsafe. The commander gave Drone Girl the go-ahead, and she did exactly what she was supposed to do. She had a little trapdoor on one of them, then tied a string to the drone so the gravity would pull the pin. She had a second drone with night vision up in the air that Nines was controlling and relaying information. When the grenade deployed, the entire house erupted in screaming. The bad guys, of course, were not first, furious that someone in the subdivision had pulled a prank on them. Maybe even their own guys, who knows? Well, they ran outside directly into another trap. There was the sound of detonations as propellant launched chemical compounds all over the bad guys. The innocent neighbors all stayed in their houses because they didn't know what was going on.